Hello, everyone. I'm Nakanishi, Arlene Schnitzer, Curator of Culture, Art, and Education here at Poland Japanese Garden. Thank you so very much for tuning in today for this very special program, Floating Space, the intersection of architecture, nature, and culture. This is, in fact, association with the current photography exhibition of Ishimoto Yasuhiro, taking place at Poland Japanese Garden, commemorating the centennial anniversary of this great artist's birth. First off, I really do hope that this program finds you and all your loved ones very well, as we are slowly but surely starting to see some light at the end of this dark tunnel. Well, while we wait for a couple more minutes to make sure everyone is logging in smoothly and getting settled in front of their PCs, I might just get the housekeeping announcements and notes all covered, as more and more people are actually logging in right now. The program will be recorded for later viewing and sharing among the public at large via Poland Japanese Garden's official YouTube channel. If you do subscribe to either the channel or the Garden's e-newsletter, you will be receiving a notification as the recorded footage is actually uploaded. Second, there will be a brief segment towards the end of the program for non-anonymous Q&A, where you can actually ask questions to today's guest speakers using the question box down below at the bottom of your screen. Today, we are very excited to learn that we will be joined by friends from many cities from all over the world, making this a truly global program. And we are expecting about 200 very keen audience members in a virtual auditorium. And for that, we obviously are very excited and grateful. Well, with that, I guess most everyone is in the virtual auditorium, now all set to go as well. So thank you so much again for joining us for another intriguing virtual program associated with the ongoing exhibition entitled Ishimoto Yasuhiro, Architecture, Nature, and Culture. I'm your host and moderator, Nakanishi, Arlene Schnitzer, Curator of Culture, Art, and Education at Poland Japanese Garden. At the very top of this program, I'd like to just express our most sincere gratitude for the Deborah and Robert Zagunis collection for the generous loan of the 15 exquisite pieces of Ishimoto photography right from the rare Katsura Villa series. We are so just grateful and honored to be able to commemorate and celebrate this artist's centennial anniversary since birth with one of the most highly regarded portfolios of photographic journey by the very artist. And this commemorative exhibition doesn't just reflect the artistic relevance and brilliance of Ishimoto today and the architectural elegance of one of Japan's most widely researched architectures, the 4 centuries-old Katsura Imperial Villa in Kyoto. But it also sheds light on Ishimoto's past as a young Japanese American who was incarcerated in one of the internment camps during wartime. And through the exhibition, we of course have highlighted the connections that exist between the Katsura Villa and Poland Japanese Garden, whose mission it is to celebrate and explore this ever-expanding symbiotic relationships between natural landscapes, architecture, and all forms of art, both traditional and contemporary. And to that end, I thought it might be a good segue, actually, before I introduce today's special speakers, to briefly but very quietly show you some of the 15 Ishimoto works on display, as the artist actually handpicked 15 of his favorite images out of roughly 20,000 images that he amassed over the course of roughly 30 years of visiting and capturing this crown jewel of Japanese architectural beauty. One thing I'd like to make sure here is to really give you that quiet and contemplative time to go through the images without any commentary, so that you can really try to take this in wherever you might be joining us from. You'll also be seeing some of the key visual references to Katsura design principles here at the Poland Japanese Garden's new cultural center that's called Cultural Village. That was developed by the architect Kengo Kuma back in 2017. Can't believe it's already been 4 years. without further ado, though, let me share screen. Well, I think no opening remarks can actually better the visual virtual viewing together to set the tone for all of us going into the main program today. If you'd like to see the show in full, but cannot travel to Poland at this time, you might find a link to our 3D virtual exhibition very useful. The link is actually included in the reminder email that you all received. Today, we are exceedingly fortunate to welcome back Dr. Yasufumi Nakamori of Tate Modern London again. I know many of you actually joined the members-only program a few weeks back, where he delivered a stunning presentation on Ishimoto and his artistic endeavor at Katsura that gave us a truly critical insight into how this imagery, how the Ishimoto's imagery might have been inframed and refashioned by a larger modern architectural movements of the 1950s, as Japan, coming out from the war-wrecked times, desperately tried to find a new architectural narrative grounded in tradition. Anyone who's interested in watching the presentation again or checking it for the first time will have the footage ready for you towards the end of the, this month, actually, on our YouTube channel. Well, now, having served as curator of photography at the Museum of Fine Art in Houston from 2008 to 2016, followed by his pivotal role at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, he's the author of this monumental book called Katsura Picturing Modernism in Japanese Architecture. This book actually had a humongous, immense impact on the current exhibition here in Poland as well. Joining us from his home is Dr. Yasufumi Nakamori, who is a senior curator of international art at Tate Modern London. Dr. Nakamori, it's a privilege to have you again today. Oh.
So, thank you.
Thank you. I might have been mute all along.
Okay, great. So you can see me now.
Yeah, I can see you. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I might have been mute actually all along. Yeah, because I was talking about the recorded footage that was going to be available
Yes.
later this month, and that's going to be available on our YouTube channel. And yeah, well, without further ado, though, I'd like to get to the next very special speaker today. When you actually talk about global thinkers and leaders in how we build not just buildings, but wild vision with which to build the future of education and architectural practice, we look to her insight. Since establishing her own practice, Toshiko Mori Architect in New York City in the early 1980s, the trailblazing work that she has been conducting over the past decades in numerous countries has actually made her one of the most sought-after architectural visionaries of our time. And we feel truly blessed to have her join us today to share her experience and wisdom. She's the Robert P. Hubbard Professor in the Practice of Architecture at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, where she served as chair of the Department of Architecture from 2002 to 2008. Professor Toshiko Mori, thank you very much for your graciousness in joining us today, right from Honolulu.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you. Huge welcome to you both. Dr. Nakamori, I'm sure the audience is very keen and eager to hear you kick off this intriguing conversation today. So the virtual podium is all yours. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. It's so nice to be back to this virtual space for programming. Thanks to everyone at the Portland Japanese Garden to make this program possible. I'm also so grateful to Professor Mori to agree to have a conversation with me. This means a lot to me. In particular, Mori-san and I, for the first time, actually had a chance to get together in 2016 to see the exhibition of the same portfolio by Yasuhiro Ishimoto of Katsura pictures at the Peter Blum Gallery in New York City. We exchange various thoughts, since then on Katsura and other aspects of photography and architecture. So it's a real pleasure and honor to have a conversation with you, Mori-san. Maybe actually I can just, refresh our recollection, and maybe some people today were not in my lecture last time. So I wanted to spend 3 minutes to talk about Ishimoto's Katsura project, and also why Katsura is so important to him, to many architects actually in post-war Japan, and also in Japan and beyond in general. So we're looking at the picture. It's an aerial photograph of the Katsura Imperial Villa. I believe this picture was included in 1960 version of Katsura Tradition and Creation in Japanese Architecture by Tange and Ishimoto. You may have been there, as a matter of fact. It was created over 50 years in the 17th century by the father and son, Toshihito and Toshitada of Hachijo no Miya family, part of Japan's imperial family in the southwest suburb of Kyoto. This whole kind of compound actually, you have to make a reservation to get in and walk through, guided walkthrough of the architecture, which consists of one large shoin. It's aristocratic dwellings developed in a Momoyama period of late 16th century style, a shoin style. And there are 4 tea houses built in Sukiya style, another architectural style developed in actually around the same time. Then there's one Buddhist hall. So those actually pavilions, the dwelling and also 4 tea houses and 1 Buddhist hall are actually placed on exquisitely beautiful garden grounds. We tend to think that tea master Kobori Enshu was involved as a design consultant. It is actually known for diversity of styles in this particular period of 17th century, at least actually, as I said, showing and Sukiya styles are employed in this. There are a lot of actually readings, interpretation of Katsura by a number of Japanese architects and non-Japanese architects as well, particularly, Isozaki Arata who actually gave an in-depth reading of Katsura in his numerous writings, and he characterized Katsura as assemblage to represent actually various styles and practices which were transformed through negotiation, composition, appropriation, mergers. Very interesting sort of like a postmodern read of the 17th century architecture and also garden. He actually describes Katsura as, quote, a text rich in ambiguity, where architectural languages of quite different formal and temporal inspirations are juxtaposed. These layers of approach and language have made Katsura an object of incessant new reading strategies, close quote, particularly in the mid-1950s under the discourse named Dento Ronso, traditional discourse, where Kenzo Tange actually played an important role. And of course, actually, the book, it's Ishimoto's photo book, which was heavily edited by Kenzo Tange, with the introduction by Walter Gropius, who was teaching actually at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard at the time, where Professor Mori teach. Gropius was in Japan in 1954, where he made actually sort of like a grand tour to Japan, spent a couple of months visiting numerous pre-modern architectures, including Katsura. So Tange, as an editor of the entire book, basically pulled Ishimoto's photographs, Tange's his own writing, as well as Gropius' introduction essay, plus Hubbard Bayer's a beautiful cover design, made this, otherwise Ishimoto's photo book project to be Tange's post-war architectural manifesto in a way, where he really argued for the relevance of pre-modern Japanese architecture in general, actually, the modern design in post-war environment in Japan. So it's a very important photo book. And of course, Ishimoto, who was trained in Chicago Bauhaus by Harry Callahan, Aaron Siskin, from 1948 to 1952, who was Japanese American, had a very different actually encounter with Katsura in 1953 and 54. He was trained in photography and also comprehensive design in Chicago Bauhaus with a teaching methodology of German Bauhaus. And of course, for him, photography was an important methodology to express. At the same time, architecture and urbanism were another important method in Ishimoto's thinking. So picture to your left, it's Yasuhiro Ishimoto's actually student work of the Lakeshore Drive apartment, just completed, designed by Mies van der Rohe in Chicago. So within 2 years, he went back to Japan. Can you hear me okay?
You have to share the screen.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
That's terrible. Okay, it's a little bit of, I thought I did share the screen. Excuse me. This is, okay. How's this?
You have to go full screen.
Okay.
Yes, I can see the book. You may want to show the picture of Katsura. Yes, that's how it started.
There you go. So this is how we started. Excuse, I really have to make an apology for this. It's a bit complicated. The aerial pictures, then Katsura book, it's a cover designed by Bayer, 1960 publication. And then I'm talking about actually this comparison between the Lakeshore Drive photo shot by Ishimoto in 51. Within a couple of years, he was back in Japan. And for the first time, he visited Katsura in 1953 with Arthur Drexler, the curator of architecture at the Museum of Modern Art at the time. For him, there was a compelling actually resonance between the beam and column structures of Lakeshore Drive apartment, and also this wall he found on one of the dwellings of Katsura. So he thought actually Katsura was a Mondrianesque. It's like a Pierre Mondrian's painting. So he had a very new way of looking at the 17th century structures. So this book, actually, the photographs you look at in Portland, actually, some comes from earlier 53, 54 photographing. But also, Ishimoto went back to Katsura in 1982 after the major restoration of Katsura. So the works you see in Portland are a mix of earlier and later images. I talked about actually drastic cropping Tange made as a picture editor. From this picture, shot by Ishimoto, was cropped by Tange and then presented actually as this. It's a strip of space from one of the 4 tea houses. But by looking at this strip of image, it really loses specificity of Japanese architecture in a way. You feel it's a part of the structure, but you can't quite tell whether this is 17th century Japanese architecture or perhaps a post-modern architecture. So that was the idea of Tange, to transform the images of pre-modern architecture into something modern and also relevant at the time. He also made a close crop certain parts of architecture, such as a tatami, fusuma, and also hearth, into the units for modern living. And those images are floating on the spread of the book. And then this really powerful dynamic image, again showing main dwelling on the upper half of the slide, but the roof is basically cropped by the Tange. Ishimoto had also very close view. Ishimoto had a resonance. The way Ishimoto looked at the Katsura and Tange, the way he looked at the Katsura was not so dissimilar. But Tange, as a picture editor, wanted to make sure that this beautiful harmony represented by architecture on the upper half can be compared to the garden in the lower half of the photograph. You can tell there's a very different imageries. It's interesting, actually, Tange compared the dichotomy in this photograph as the dichotomy he observed between Jomon and Yayoi. Those are 2 prehistoric Japanese cultural periods. So for Tange, Katsura represented the harmonious and also sometimes contentious presence of duality. For him, that was the essence of Katsura. And he thought actually photography can reveal that dynamism and differences so much more effectively than in real visit. So this would be a kind of good way to start our conversation, Mori-san. Perhaps actually I can ask you your personal experience at the Katsura when you were growing up in Japan.
Yes, thank you, Nakamori-san, for wonderful introduction. And as you mentioned before, we were in Peter Bloom Gallery looking exactly at this collection with my wishful thinking of me maybe being able to buy it, but this is better that it's accessible to public now. And I think I grew up in Kobe, and my aunt lived in Kyoto, and my grandmother who lived with us, she was very close to my aunt. We'll go to Kyoto every Saturday. And because of it, we'll always have amazing journey. My grandmother introduced me to all the gardens and temples every Saturday. That will be my childhood. And therefore, I've been to Katsura as a child a number of times. And the way that access was always guided, but it was very much more informal. But it's a very formal garden, and you're very conscious of it. It's completely artificially constructed. It has numerous references to Japanese literature, in which my aunt will cite from a literature text, and this is a reference to it. So for a child, before a film, this is as if you read a Japanese text or more of a historical text about description. This will be the view of gardens and so forth. So in a way, it's actually, it's highly scripted, and also gardens in the different seasons. And it's actually fairly miniaturized experience, and you have to go through very carefully. And then because of it, and it is created for Imperial Palace, you always are conscious that you are actually being controlled completely in a way of a sequence and what you're observing. It was informal visit, but actual experience is incredibly formal. And the Japanese going through Katsura takes incredible amount of heavy historical cultural luggage. And then you always say, oh, I have to go back and read this next time I come back. So all these kind of stresses come to play in this. But it's always enjoyable. And as I mentioned to Nakamori-san before, in my family, there's a merchant kimono merchant was very next to Katsura. So my fond memory is that whenever we get new kimono made for my grandmother or my mother, or even I got to have one made, is to visit. It's elaborate affair, as some of you know. It takes a whole day to select the textiles and kind of embroidery and matching obi and accessory, all this, and then you have a lunch in between, and then afternoon we go visit Katsura. So I have this amazing experience, and then also this cultural weight of Katsura in my mind.
It's interesting actually you mentioned that experiencing Katsura is often well scripted. I agree, actually. You have to make I guess nowadays you have to make a reservation ahead of time. You have to wait to find out which day, what time you allocated to go visit, basically. Then you have to wait in a waiting room. You have to be in a tour, basically. You're guided actually to visit, not all of the 4 tea houses, but you spend like an hour or two. But what I realized when I was there was the importance of stepping stones, in a garden. I felt actually stepping stone was really well thought out. They kind of guide you from one pavilion to another. There's also kind of psychological effect. I felt like I have to follow. I cannot really step outside of it. I have to be on a route by following the stepping stones. Do you have any sense how the stepping stone may work in that journey?
It's one of the most important thing about Katsura's journey is the pacing of it. And it's spatially, as I said, miniaturized to make that space grand and monumental experience. Is that when the stepping stones are not regular, and some of them are quite rough and some are smooth, some are very small and some are very large. So you will actually pace your body with the experience. It will also orient yourself to the direction you should be viewing, but the next stop is not right in front of you, but it's on the left side. So you will change orientation. So it's an amazing pacing device to change the scalar experience and also orientation device. And for rough stones, you have to be more careful of your balance. And some of the stones, which is more distance, you really have to be prepared to leap forward. So that's actually is a visceral experience, highly visceral experience at the same moment.
Actually, the visceral part, I remember when I was there last time with my father, who had a trouble walking. It was quite a hard experience for him to, basically step from one stone to another. But as you said, actually, the height of the stone was all different. I think that's what he told me. But something actually I did not really, as keenly experience as much as he did, because of his physical disability.
Yeah, but I also had the same experience as a child. It's a really difficult to walk on Katsura.
Yeah.
Elderly, but yeah, so it's very interesting experience.
I mean, this kind of, the duality of the public and private nature, which still continues in a way. I mean, that was made as a, private home for part of the imperial family in 17th century, but then, 19th, 20th century, well, after Meiji restoration, in a way, Katsura became public in a sense that it was still closed only to, certain noble people or, important foreign visitors, perhaps. And after 1945, it became in a way the public space, but, not really in substance. Do you have any comment on that duality of private and public nature of the architecture?
That's a very broad question, and I think when I was growing up, it was very highly accessible and publicly accessible space, and I think that there's a duality because there are spaces which are still closed for public to this day, and of course it's maintained by imperial office, so that it's possession of a country, and therefore it's public property. So I think that's a very interesting aspect of Katsura, which although it's a public property and publicly accessible, but it does still maintain some of the private territories. For one is delicate materials and much more limited use or limited access is really not easy or for publics to access, or it's actually a little too fragile for public access. So that kind of duality.
Yes, thank you. There are three actually kind of concepts, I picked up from Katsura in general. There are sustainability, duality, dichotomy, and interconnection between inside and outside. And I would like to actually ask if you could please apply those concepts actually perhaps in your own design. And this way, I think I would like to make a connection between Katsura and also your design practice.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to share the screen now. I hope you can see it.
Yes.
So I have never, because of overwhelming weight, cultural weight of Katsura to me, and one of the most refreshing aspects of Ishimoto's photographs is that he's completely devoid of that heavy luggage. He really sees Katsura as abstract from very fresh point of view, and which is very inspiring. So later on, I had this child memory, and then it's fantastical, but sometimes nightmarish. But with Ishimoto, I get a fresh perspective, understanding of it. And I have to say that I'm not a type of architect who connects directly my influences or insights into the kind of practice, but just threading through some practice, which I was very interested in Katsura, is that in fact, Enshu Kobori and then imperial emperors use the typology of humble folk houses to aesthetize it, which is very interesting, and showing zukuri, which is very much of imperial style, and it has modular systems. And then this skia style, which has more creative aspects of it, kind of interweaves what you call anonymous folk architecture, and which relates to the humbleness of tea practice. I was very interested and inspired in it, and I actually borrowed this idea, and I think it's a very sustainable idea to use vernacular and also respects the life of every day, but elevated into a new aesthetic. And so this is very far-fetched, but I had a project in Africa, in Senegal, in which it's a thatched roof. And as opposed to Tange, I retained the significance of a roof in Katsura as something very, very important and sustainable, because thatched roof is a series of layers of grass, and it's practiced universally everywhere. It's sustainable because layers of it makes incredible insulation, and also it's porous. It helps with the stuck effect. Air comes in and slowly it goes out, so it invites cool air in. And also roof helps because of a strands of grass helps to direct rainwater, in this case is a gutter, in a place where water was very, very scarce. We use this idea of a slope to collect rainwater in this building, which is called Thread, which I worked with Albert's Foundation based in United States to create a cultural center in a very remote community, underserved community in Senegal. And also I really took ideas from African hut. And it's not Katsura, but it's a village combining gardens and the pavilions. And as you can see, it's a very humble hut, but materials all come from the land and built by local craftspeople. In terms of Kyoto, Katsura is all built with a local technique, local craftsman, which survives, and then really elevated into artistic ideas. And we had it made a little bit thicker than usual to increase it. And you like to notice there's some similarities. They have bamboo as a local material, and the thatched roof is on top. And this is a public building, and we use computer technology to parametrically study the possibility of increasing the size and scale of this technique into larger aspects of it. But with it came the knowledge, if you could notice the right hand, and I have done a lot of studies. I took students to Kyoto twice to study the craft and also Machiya typology. And both times I took them to Katsura because they say, everybody says, what's the crisis of today's architecture? I said, well, the relationship of materials and crafts, idea of environment and site. If you take students to Katsura, they can learn everything all at once. And on the bottom side is how Japanese buildings are made. There's a very unique tying method, which allows a bamboo to shift and yield a little bit. So it actually is earthquake resistance. And there's no earthquake in Senegal, but it has strong wind. So when I showed this photograph, the local craftsman worked with it to stimulate this kind of binding process to combine it. So it's not as if displacing existing technique, but in a sense, they completely embodied it so that they can make larger, stronger roof as we go through this. So it's quite a large roof. And also another thing that I wanted to introduce is, which is very strong in Ishimoto's photograph, is sense of chiaroscuro, idea of having diverse, very different sense of shades. In Africa, it's either it's bright sunlight or the house itself is a complete darkness. And of course, this is in equator, so sun comes up very rapidly, goes down, so there's bright day and dark. And I wanted to introduce the idea of a shade of inside, outside spaces in which they can actually come together, and then to gather together for many different purposes, for gathering of a people, the kids, and so forth. Also, it provides coolness. And this roof, in fact, able to collect 30% of water, rainwater, for villagers' use, and they now are making gardens. So idea of a Katsura garden became more in terms of new economic resources. So they can't be so aestheticized. It's vegetables and plants are food sources, so that's how they actually survive. And you can see how this is a different kind of idea of a shades, which are fairly new to this culture. And I was really afraid of imposing, but they found this to be incredibly comfortable. And of course, it's in a bright sunlight in the sunlight kind of 115 degrees, inside it could be 90, 85 degrees, and then you can see a breeze through, and it really gives an issue of comfort, which I think is very important aspects of sustainability, which I think Katsura does. Again, one has to experience it. You actually sense a really interesting breeze coming through, and also you have a scent and how things are coming through. If you buy the water, you sense the coolness, that kind of relationship. So this is a continuation idea of a shade and light, and also it can become a very large gathering spaces, and kids come in and they occupy places of a low roof of their own territory. And this is actually the compound. It's been operating as artist residence for 4 or 5 years. And the next concept, would you like to comment? Yes.
Maybe just one question to actually. So this is a multi-function building. So artist residency, gathering, what are the other functions? And my other question is actually, all the functions this architecture has now are something intended from the beginning, intended by you, well, there are some added functions, something you did not intend.
All right, so it's a place of, mainly it's artist residence, artists invited by Hubbard Foundation, international, African, local artists. There's one house for artists to live and they interact with the villagers to enhance the cultural community. This region has 12 tribes. They don't always share the language, but they share performance and music together. So the cultural sharing is a very important part of stability of this particular community. An unintended one is we didn't prescribe how the gathered water in system is used, and they have actually started to do more of a cultivating gardens to enhance economy, and women have made up agricultural collective to grow fonio, which is a gluten-free like a couscous, and they grow more valued vegetables like okra and eggplant. And this area where you make $10 US can send one kid to school for a year. So it's a very large asset. And also an intended issue is in front of it became a regional soccer field. So it became an annual place where people from this region come together to play soccer.
That's fantastic. Thank you. The second concept we learned from Katsura through Ishimoto's photograph is duality and dichotomy. Simultaneous existence of two, seemingly opposing concepts, in one place. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, right. So example, this is an idea of a kind of duality in which you can see through the inside, outside, an idea of a continuity, horizontal discontinuity, all of this. And I think one interesting example also has to do with Japan. There's a Darwin Martin house of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I built a visitor center, which is probably on beyond it. An interesting story is that when he was building this building, 1904, 1906, when he got a commission to do Imperial Hotel. So he leaves the job site of this house to go to Tokyo to see Imperial House. And Darwin Martin was a CFO of a company, and he funded Frank Lloyd Wright's activity to collect Japanese print, and he purchased some of them, and he's kind of being a patron throughout the life. So that's a story. But dichotomy of duality is that as opposed to the brick building of Frank Lloyd Wright, my pavilion is opposite in terms of glass and glazing. And then instead of having a hip roof, this has a reverse hip roof to show that the hip roof is a private house. Reverse hip roof is open to public. And then idea of a duality in which you have a house, historical house, a new building, and a new building acts as a vitrine to view the historical building. And it makes a continuous landscape. In a way, I had to work with duality of respecting historical property, and then but having a dependent presence of a contemporary architectural visitor center, but the entire ground will look like an integrated campus in itself. And this is a detailing which the connectivity happens is that the ground, exterior ground, and the floor of visitor center is a coplanar. So this is something Frank Lloyd Wright also observing from his observation of Japanese architecture is continuity of interior and exterior. So in a way, so I think that's actually a concept that I had worked on.
It's really interesting, actually. This glass facade, exposing inside interior versus actually kind of introversion of the Wright's architecture. I mean, it's very hard to see what's going on inside of the Wright's house in a way. Although, if you are inside of the Frank Lloyd house, you often see a landscape into the interior. I remember being at the Taliesin, having a distinct view from the inside to outside. I felt that was his way of borrowing the landscape into the architecture. That was a very interesting experience I've had personally. So, but it's interesting, as you mentioned, that I'm certain Frank Lloyd Wright, who I guess visited Japan a couple of times, I think starting late 19th century, and I think he was in Japan in 1905. I'm pretty certain he visited Katsura, although there are no, personal records or notes by him I've seen. So that's an interesting sort of like area to, further pursue Frank Lloyd Wright's take on Katsura as an architecture. The third, yes, go ahead.
And also because he's a collector of Japanese prints. And Mario Moholy, who did nearly all the renderings for him, really takes on aesthetic of Japanese prints. And then also Japanese prints he collected has this relationship of landscape and architecture all the time.
I mean, as a matter of fact, he made actually quite high income by selling those ukiyo-e prints as a dealer. I think there's exhibitions on that aspect of Frank Lloyd Wright's practice in Japan Society Gallery years ago. So that's an interesting point. The third point, actually, which kind of relates to part of what you said, is interconnection. The relationship between inside and outside. Actually, Ishimoto said to me that for him, visiting one tea house to another, one outbuilding to another, through the guided stepping stones was like just one experience. It was like a continuous journey in Katsura, as opposed to making a separate visit to each building. So the interconnection between the outside and inside is something we found interesting, and some pictures by Ishimoto point out. So I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit in your design.
Oh, right. So the last project I showed today has more direct relationship to Katsura, because my client loves Katsura and American and being able to visit, and also was very much interested in a house. But at the same time, instead of having one big house, why can't we build a series of pavilions? Because we only live in one space at a time, which is, yes, of course. And then in a way, this is completely digitally controlled, so that one pavilion can be turned on and off. So sustainable, one can be completely controlled. So in the sense, minimal footprints in terms of different functions. I think the left side hand function, the exercise pavilion, that's next to the second from the left is a main house. This is really minimally where he and his wife can live. And then entertainment pavilion when people come in for dinners and also screening of movies in the guest house. So that it's a very, very modern idea, but you can call them also a modern glass house camp, but also a la Katsura a little bit. It has continuity about it. This is a model of it. this is a view of it in a winter landscape. So this is upstate in New York State in the winter time. This looks like a series of pavilions. Of course, aesthetically has nothing to do with Katsura, but it has this idea of a continuous walkways in which, yes, in the middle of winter, they have to put a coat on to go to exercise pavilion, but they do not mind the journey. We do have a snow melting mechanism, so the walkway is completely snow and ice free at times. Work with Edwina Bongal, the landscape architect, to do combining more of a native landscape into it. So there's a sense of naturalness, which I think is interesting in Katsura too. You sense its naturalness, but nothing is left to nature. Everything is complete control.
Yes.
In case of this situation with Edwina Bongal, she actually let a lot of nature take on its own course. That would be the difference. And also relationship of buildings to its own rocks itself, instead of destroying, it's kind of perching on it. In the relationship to harmony, these are my clients actually living in this house, the main house, or the view from inside to the outside. And then that's a guest house, which is in the nature. And last photograph I show is this idea of when Ishimoto shows photograph, a lot of sense of physical symmetry. And I think I and also contemporary architects achieve this symmetry through the idea of reflections. And also Ishimoto's symmetrical axis sometimes, a lot of times is very horizontal, which is what actually Miss Binder does. So this is the end of my talk, and I will stop sharing.
It's interesting. I have a couple of questions actually. How did actually your client find this particular site? That's first question. And then how did you decide actually situate those 4 pavilions in the exact location? And how, you look around perhaps the landscape around, then you sort of like decided, where those 4 pavilions goes. Would you tell us a little bit about that process, siting those pavilions in that particular landscape?
Well, siting is very important for me. And I'm also realizing, can you all hear me? Oh, it's okay? All right. So I walk the site a lot and really figuring out. And so you have to sense where the wind is coming from. You do analysis in terms of the weather and then the change of seasons. And one would actually do both analysis on paper as well as on the ground experiential ones to really identify the actual location. And then once you stake it out, sometimes you may have to move it one or rather. So it's a very laborious process. And in terms of Katsura, I think that's actually an amazing thing that each pavilion has absolutely perfect orientation. It has to do with feng shui. And there is a very fundamental knowledge of siting in Japan, in which should be practiced. That's actually the origin of sustainability. Because if you don't site the buildings properly, you can never correct it. No matter how much solar panels and stuff you add onto it, you have to get the siting right. And so in my office, in my practice, we are always so careful to get it right. And in the middle of we never do it middle of construction, but in planning, we may start to move, staying up few feet off and on just to try it out. And once you get it right, you always get it right. Its site is interesting. It's not forgiving. It has its own sense, and you either get it right or not get it.
What about actually the energy consumption aspect of this particular house? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
It has a triple glazing, so incredibly insulated. This is like as insulated as, and then also radiant heating. It has huge insulation on the roof. And one of the ideas is that you don't turn on energy all the time. You actually can minimize it to all this. And then when you are using it, you turn it off properly. So there's a very clear digital control. And I think the charge for our client is that to Miss Vanderro's Farnsworth house, it fogs all the time. And Johnson's glass house. It condensates, it gets too hot to coat. With the current technology and materials, can we actually do a sustainable glass house? And that's the result.
Do you know anything about sort of like the temperature control aspect of Katsura? I wonder. You know, I guess there's no heater, nothing, of course, in Katsura. They're all sort of like you know, natural airflow and, you know, those fusuma and shoji, and, you know, that would allow the air to come in and out. Do you have any observation of their structures of temperature control?
Yeah, of course. I think when I was growing up, we didn't have air conditioning. No.
Right, yes.
So like in those times, people just wore more clothes or lived with nature. And there's one architect, Koji Ito, who practiced in 1920s, and Togo Murano's contemporary. He actually did incredible series of prototype sustainable houses using traditional methods and techniques, using with the Issei Shrine carpenters in Kyoto to prove that those traditional methods, as I mentioned before, with thatched roof, with woven ceilings and all that, those are so much advanced sustainable strategies. It's all passive energy construction.
Going back to house in Ghent, did you think about actually perhaps applying stepping stones somewhere, you know, in that house?
I could, but it gets to be a little precarious in terms of safety of certain people. It's actually, I mean, in a way, in Katsura, it's part of experience and aesthetic, and it's not for everyday life. And it's very specific to this experience, but for people to be living, to need to manage daily life, I think it could be challenging. I think there is another project which I have used that, in which a client's willing to accept that kind of challenges.
You mentioned also the how your architecture is being photographed, actually, you know, to show the certain aspects of design. I think photography is an important tool in a way.
Yes.
I wanted to hear actually, well, you perhaps commissioned, you know, a photographer to work with you. What do you want to accomplish in photographing your own design?
Well, I have a collaborative relationship with a couple of photographers. One, I'm very close to Iwan Ban, he's a Dutch photographer. I met him in China before he was well known, and I'm one of the first one to commission him, and I've known him since, and he's like a strategic fame now, but he's very good at carrying digital camera, informally photographing it, kids and people in it, for example. And also Paul Washoe is a photographer who is more like a traditional Ishimoto, very abstract and very precise framing, and then can able to capture it. They're two completely different ideas. And I don't know if we have to do Q&A.
Yes, maybe actually, should we open it up? Just one quick comment though, on your last comment. So Ishimoto, it's interesting actually, Ishimoto was never an architecture photographer per se. He didn't like to be told what to photograph or how to photograph. So interesting, actually, that was one of the contentious points I think Ishimoto and Tange had actually after their 1960 publication of Katsura. Thank you. Let's open it up, perhaps. Aki-san, what do you think?
Yeah, why not? I mean, God, what? Am I audible, by the way? I just want to make sure. Because some people are, you know, having some hearing issues as well on their PCs probably, but I've been hearing both of you really, you know, nice and crisp actually all along. So what a, truly, it was just a tour de force of a conversation between the two of you. I just feel I couldn't have picked better professionals to really examine the sensibilities and artistry of Ishimoto from all possible, literally all possible angles, while addressing some of the most iconic yet not commonly talked about aspects of Katsura including duality, dichotomy that you talked about, and configurability, marked also by, architectural porosity as well for light, as Morrison pointed out, breeze and aroma, and of course people, they flow across different parts of the architecture. It was also very stimulating to learn Morrison's childhood memories visiting Katsura, and how that might have kind of contributed in a big part as a kind of, being a big cultural baggage for, for her later, I guess it must have been a seminal experience and exposure to Japanese traditional architecture, having a lasting impact on her, not just the architectural practice around the world, but also her educational philosophies and methodologies for fostering the next generation of architects. I really like the public versus private functionalities of architecture topic as well. As a public garden organization, we are always thinking about that public versus private purposes whenever we try to build new things. So it really was a very, very interesting and exciting point to make, actually, and hear your thoughts on that point. Now, like you said, Nakamori-san, I'd like to gradually steer the program towards a Q&A session where the audience has a chance to post questions and comments using the Q&A box down below at the bottom of the screen. But I'd like to also exercise the moderator's, I guess, privilege to ask the first couple of questions, if I may, while the audience members post their questions in the Q&A box. Is that okay? Nakamori-san, first. So,
of course, yes.
Kind of touching upon what you alluded to already towards the very end of the conversation we just heard. It's about Ishimoto's artistry as a visual artist back when photography as an artistic medium wasn't really recognized as such. I mean, because a lot of people were just taking photographs for documentation purposes, not for really pictorial or artistic expression. And at the same time, Katsura Villa was there for 400 years before he visited for the first time. It's always been part of Kyoto traditional culture, but very few people probably saw it as a work of architectural art. So I just wonder, what your take is on in terms of Ishimoto trying to prove his point that he found a new crown jewel in the art of architecture, or he just wanted to be an artist all by, sort of in his own right, by taking something that resembles, like you said, Mondrian's painting out of what people had already known, 400 years previously. So I just wonder, Nakamori-san, your personal approach to looking at Ishimoto's photography, is it documentary photograph or is it art photograph in your view?
Okay, so that's a kind of classic question. Is photography a document or fine art? So for Ishimoto, from the beginning, photography was art, certainly. Trained at the New Bauhaus, in a tradition of photography as a medium which allow artists to experiment, right? Whether you're an architect or a painter, sculptor, they're all photographed. But Ishimoto, I think, photography was the medium for him. I don't think he actually ever thought photography as a tool for document. I mean, he always actually framed whatever he photographed very tightly, never cropped anything. The way he cropped, the way he looked at things, through the finder was the moment to create art. So he stumbled upon this incredible architecture, a garden, as his first subject to photograph after his return to Japan in 1953. So
what a humongous encounter, actually, of one of the what's considered to be the apex and pinnacle of Japanese traditional architectural style and craftsmanship. meeting one of the most up-and-coming, freshest talent from the United States, almost freshly out of college, right? Because he must have been in his early 30s when he first visited Katsura. So
that's correct, right? He went to university, actually, New Bauhaus. His art education was quite late. He started when he was 27, after war ended. So
right. Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
Mori-san, if I may, again, thank you so very much for sharing your project photo images as well. I mean, those were absolutely breathtaking and thought-provoking at the same time, actually. So my question to you as a primer is about technology and perhaps preservation of craftsmanship that you touched upon in your presentation as well. Technology and its kind of evolving role for architecture and the environment in general, as you find more kind of sophisticated materials to work with. From your experience, though, how do you think architects and landscape architects, for that matter, today should aim to balance the use of technology with the human skills and wisdom, such as master craftsmanship that we've seen across the Katsura Villa, how they incorporate natural material, how they can actually, start incorporating more natural material going forward. I mean, 400 years ago when Katsura and many other buildings for that matter were built, there were no CAD drawings and automated structural simulators to speak of. So in the age of artificial intelligence and ever expanding technological kind of field, I just wonder what your take is like on optimizing the use of technology, not just to prevent ecological imbalance and loss of craftsmanship, but rather proactively promote and preserve those things. I just want to hear you once again reiterate that aspect of technology, how you approach it.
So I think my point is that the traditional craftsmen, especially in Tokyo, Kyoto region, and the ones who are involved with making Katsura and continue to build, they're intelligent. The intelligence is timeless, and the wisdom is incredible, and their knowledge is timeless. Whereas technology is changeable. It could be smart, it has information, but things actually change. And so between both of them, there's a balance that we have to always figure it out. And that was a time in which handmade manual production was the only choice. Now we've gone through the mechanical production time, and then now it's digital production. But it's not going to be exclusive. I think it's going to be always bridging between those three. And we can't forget, but think that majority, if not like 80% of the world, do not depend or cannot depend on technology. It's not accessible. So in terms of economy, and especially this world post-pandemic, we're really interested in the equitable development of everybody. This new focus on local supply, local material, promoting local craftsmanship is actually going to be more important and more focused than disposable technologies that can become obsolete within a time sequence. So I think we just have to balance between timelessness of knowledge of a building versus, which is helpful, smart information-based technology, which can do a very rapid repair.
Wow, yeah, precisely. I could not agree with you more. Yeah. Having said that, we want to be mindful about time as well, and we have a number of questions actually coming through the Q&A box actually. So I want to quickly turn to some of the questions, if we may. I think my previous question to you, Mori-sensei, about technology, I think that was also touched by some other people as well. So I'm just going to go right into some other questions with different angle. But kind of related loosely to the innovative design and technology. This question comes from JCYA. She or he is curious, with such innovative designs and approaches, how would you convince clients who are afraid of doing something new? So I guess it's your personal kind of architectural practice in terms of how you interact with your own clients, trying to do new things. That's for Professor Mori, I think.
For me, I think as climate change, sustainability, changing equation a lot. So I think clients want to have buildings which are long lasting, and then in long term, there's a cost savings, and then also easy to repair. And some of the techniques, technology, and material which is available to us are often highly consumable, highly deterioratable. And so in a way, convincing clients is not about pure innovation, but the purpose of innovation and purpose of new ways of approaching it, or even going back to old way or handmade way of approaching it. So I think a lot of us are struggling with alternative to unsustainable way of living, and architecture and buildings contribute 40% of energy use in the world, which is huge. So I think we are all mindful, and clients are very interested in that type of way of approach.
Wow. So this question comes from Mary regarding duality as concepts in today's lecture. She says, we saw a contrast between black and white photography and then color photography as the media for representing architecture. It's probably a question potentially for both of the speakers. Did Ishimoto ever use color photography? And if not, why not? And Professor Mori, I think there's going to be another question for you. So, but for the first part of the question, perhaps Nakamori-san could answer this.
Sure, I'm happy to. Ishimoto did photograph in color after the restoration of Katsura in 1982. So, but color picture actually was something else. When you take a photograph of something color, which tends to contain sumptuous, a little too much information in the image. So the image, color image really lost his earlier, edgier, modern read into 17th century architecture. So for Ishimoto, the color picture was something, I think he said if he were younger, he would never appreciate image of that kind, color picture of Katsura. However, as he aged, the way he looked at Katsura changed. He paid attention to colors, more decoration, for example, the details of things he found later after the restoration.
Very interesting. So the same person, Mary, also has another question for you, Professor Mori. She asks you whether you allow your photographers to take black and white photographs of your architectural projects.
Yes, I think so. In a way, strangely, I realized that Iwan Baan follows a lot of Ishimoto's trajectory. He captures everything full frame, and then when he feels like black and white, he does it. So I really leave it up to artistry of a photographer to capture the moments. And I think that's a very important aspect of collaboration with photographers to respect their art.
Great. Maybe we have a time for just one more question. That's for Professor Mori again, if we may. This comes from Leo Sealand. Question for Professor Mori. Why are you aware of the importance of traditional or vernacular construction techniques when you were in early phases of your career? Or one of the sort of aha moments, throughout your career development as an professional architect?
Well, it predates me being professional architect because my grandparents lived in a house which is a vernacular farmhouse in Nawaji Island. And also my grandfather was is actually Feng Shui master. He worked for Ministry of Agriculture to locate rice paddies and irrigation methods. So I would go with my grandfather to walk from rice paddy to rice paddy to understand. And so we saw all the folk houses in it. And so I kind of have a love of a folk architecture and agricultural aspects of a production of before I was very much interested in urban architecture. So it really predates my career for my interest of a vernacular typology.
Wow, great. Thank you very much for sharing your personal journey getting here as well. I mean, we also want to be mindful again of time. And so it's probably a good time to sort of start wrapping up. We did indeed cover an amazing number of different topics and thoughts over the past hour or so. Nakamori-san, do you have any final thoughts or comments on any part of today's discussion?
Well, actually, I am going to tell the book actually I received, I read, actually, it's a Toshiko Mori Architect's Observations. It's a fantastic book, just came out last year from German publisher. So, I would urge you to get a copy and learn more about actually Professor Mori's architecture. It was very inspirational to study, learn about your designs and thinking, and also relationship back to your early years. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for invitation to speak. And with Nakamori-san, as you can see, we can be speaking for hours on end. We have so much to talk, and it's rare occasion we were put together. So thank you for the occasion. And I have to also say that I have not visited your garden. My husband is a member, and he keeps urging me to go to visit. And my husband, James Carpenter, he has done this dome in Portland, and he just can't stop talking about it. So he's a big admirer. So whenever we are off this COVID, and I think we are close because I'm already in site visit, I would like to come and visit your beautiful garden. So it's an honor to be invited. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We cannot literally wait to be able to invite you both to our garden actually one of these days as we start seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. So I guess for the audience, you all agree that it's just been one terrific journey, and it's been a journey of how we can find expression in centuries of designs and refined simplicity. A journey of incredible artist self-discovery who was born 100 years ago exactly. Journey into the unique and ever-expanding architectural vision of one of the most acclaimed architects from Japan. A journey of the interconnected relationships between art, architecture, and nature. As a garden organization, Portland Japanese Garden is charged with the mission of promoting global peace through the appreciation of nature and culture. And every journey here has enriched our exploration as we try to find the common thread that connects those critical elements. And I hope it enriched your personal journey as well. So I'd like to conclude this program by expressing our heartfelt gratitude for both Dr. Nakamori and Professor Mori for their incredible contributions and wisdom. And of course, equal gratitude to you all, the viewers, for the privilege of your attention and time. So again, thank you so very much, Nakamori-san and Mori-san. I hope to see you in person one of these days. Thank you so much, and please do stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.